now have over 80 unicorns, billion-dollar companies in these markets elsewhere in our network. And Endeavor Catalyst, our fund we'll get to later, has invested in 63 of these. So yes, it is not just happening in Silicon Valley, and we're going to get into that.
Welcome to Born to Unicorn. Today, we go behind the scenes of one of the most powerful movements in global entrepreneurship with none other than Linda Chica Loca Rottenberg. If you think unicorns are born in Silicon Valley only, think again. Linda has helped scale more than 2,500 high-impact entrepreneurs in more than 42 markets. 45 markets, more than 50 unicorns, over 4.1 million jobs created, and more than 50 billion in combined revenues. Today, she shares her lessons with us. So let's go. Linda, welcome to Born to Unicorn. It's truly an honor to have you here. You've been an inspiration for so many of us building companies and supporting founders. Linda, welcome to Born to Unicorn.
Well, it's great to be here. Proud to have had you part of Endeavor for many, many years and decades, Juan. And actually, we now have over 80 unicorns, billion-dollar companies in these markets elsewhere in our network. And Endeavor Catalyst, our fund we'll get to later, has invested in 63 of these. So yes, it is not just happening in Silicon Valley, and we're going to get into that.
Well, it's interesting because I'm from Argentina, and when I did talk with people about Endeavor, the first idea is Endeavor works with the companies in the U.S. and it's not, and they say they believe that is mostly. Is better if you start a company here. But we have the case for instance, Mercado Libre, right? Mercado Libre is an Endeavor company. Marcos Galperin is an Endeavor entrepreneur. So this company is valued 130 billion against the let's say the comparable in the US, which is eBay, is 36 billion, I think. How can this be possible?
Yeah, well, I was, as you said, when your introduction, known as Chica Loca 28 years ago for even suggesting there were entrepreneurs in emerging markets. And we started in Latin America. And actually, one of the first entrepreneurs that I met was Wences Casares. So Wences had, of course, grown up on a sheep farm in Patagonia, was starting Patagon.com, which was going to be the E-Trade of Latin America. All 34 Argentine investors had turned him down, but we thought he was on to something and helped Wences raise his first $4 million in capital from Fred Wilson, then of Union Square Ventures, then of Flatiron Partners, now Union Square Ventures. We helped him Wences find a COO. He married Belle, my assistant. So Endeavor was full service back then. And of course, Patagon sells to Santander Bank in 1999 for $750 million, which in today's dollars would be about $1.2 billion. And that's one of the things that Marcos and Hernan, who were at Stanford in 1998, 99, were paying attention to. And so they moved back to Argentina in 1999 instead of staying in Silicon Valley, because they thought, hey, if Wences can do it, maybe we can too. And of course, that's the story. So I met them in 1999, right when they were starting out. And they were these two also seemingly crazy kids taking on eBay, as you mentioned. And today, you're right, it has a market cap of $130 billion. But what is so exciting is the revolution that Wences and Marcos and Hernan and Nico Sakazi and others have now started throughout Latin America, where it does not seem crazy today for a kid in Argentina or Colombia or Brazil to say, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. But 28 years ago, there wasn't even a word. Emprendedor was not even used. And we're seeing this, we'll talk later, in 45 markets around the world. And I think people aren't even aware of the entrepreneurship and the levels that are happening outside Silicon Valley and maybe China.
And everything started in a way that for most Latin Americans is crazy. So you graduated from Harvard University, a Bachelor in Arts in Social Studies, graduated magna cum laude, brilliant person, and Yale Law School, where you earned a Juris Doctor. And with those degrees, it was like just getting a job was the easier option. You probably was making a lot of money, way more than you probably did for a long, long time in this path. So, okay, you are really crazy, or was something else behind?
Well, I believe that, my book is called Crazy as a Compliment because if you're not being called crazy when you're starting something new, then you're probably not thinking big enough. So others thought I was crazy to suggest there were these high growth, what we call high impact entrepreneurs in Latin America and other emerging markets. But I sort of saw around the corner and saw the talent and saw the capital, and there was just no trust. And so we really thought, and we call Endeavor a network of trust, a global network of trust, because we thought that if we could find these young entrepreneurs and connect them with mentors and connect them with markets and capital, that actually there was so much talent across the world that was being underinvested in, underserved, undiscovered, and yet there. So I think that when I look back and I see these 2,500 Endeavor entrepreneurs, as you say, 83 of which are now have grown up to be unicorns, I think that it wasn't us creating this phenomenon. It was just unlocking the human potential that was always there. It just wasn't seen.
Okay, you're putting it in very simple, terms. I don't think it was like that, right? It was
And I was considered crazy for a lot of times. I got a lot of doors shut in my face. That is true.
so because let's go back to the difficult years,
Yeah,
okay? At the beginning, because for entrepreneurs, every day you wake up in the morning and say, "I will eat the world," and you go to sleep saying, "I'm a total failure," and then next
totally,
day is the same thing.
totally, totally.
So probably for you it was the same thing, but with the at the end
Yeah.
you had the opportunity to say at any point of time saying, you know what, I get a fantastic job, and that's it. Uh,
Yeah.
Describe those difficult years at the beginning. How was
Yeah.
it?
Well, first of all, I would say I am an entrepreneur. I did face my parents and my own, what I call my kitchen table moment when I had to tell my parents that I wasn't, they thought if I wasn't going into law, I'd go into banking or consulting, right? And I said, no, I'm doing this great. They didn't understand what I was doing for many years. And I think that is why I connect so much with entrepreneurs that just today, this morning, I was on a CEO call hosted by Jeff Sonnenfeld, a superstar professor at the Yale School of Management, and they were honoring Jensen of NVIDIA, and you had Jensen of NVIDIA and Reid Hoffman and Michael Dell and Mark Benioff and Steve Case of AOL and all these top people, and it was 160 top CEOs, and Jeff not only invited me but asked me to make some remarks. And so I started talking about what was going on in AI in places like Poland with 11 labs, an Endeavor company that is the top voice AI company in the world out of Poland. There are Ukrainian AI companies that are now crushing everyone. The fact that Globant, another Argentine company, just last week published its AI studios and plans for companies around the world to be delivering their services in AI tokens, not in human hours. And all of this AI innovation going around all the world. And when I got off, people were like, yeah, this niche thing in these markets. Next, I
Yeah.
went back to talking about entrepreneurship and AI in the US. And I thought, oh my God, I'm back to being Chica Loca. I was back to, here I am being invited, all these CEOs. And they're like, after I speak, what? Tunisia, Argentina, Ukraine, who are you? Why are you here? And so it's never easy. So you always wake up in the morning thinking you're going to conquer the world and go to sleep thinking, oh my God, I have so far to go. But welcome to entrepreneurship. And I kind of like that because I sort of feel like if you were doing something that were easy, everyone would be doing it and the competition's greater. So the thing about entrepreneurship in these markets Endeavor calls elsewhere is it is always hard. So yes, when we were starting out, it was very hard to get the attention of anyone in Silicon Valley to invest in these entrepreneurs. There were very few funds focused on places like Latin America or the Middle East or Southeast Asia. It was hard to get the top business leaders interested. I remember going into a room in Mexico in 2000 and being told, do you know what percentage of Mexico's GDP is in this room? And I said, no, and maybe I don't want to. And hearing from what I called the big fish, asking the question, why isn't entrepreneurship happening in Mexico? And me literally, crazy Linda, telling these gentlemen that ran all of Mexico, that they were the big fish and they ate the little fish, trying not to look at Carlos Slim. And that if they wanted, entrepreneurship, they should support Endeavor and build an aquarium to feed the little fish. I mean, this is what we went up against. But my journey really mirrors so many of the entrepreneurs' journeys. I'm sure your own story. And I kind of love that. I kind of love being, unexpected, under the radar. And in some ways, think about it, it takes less pressure. Because if you're expected that you're in Silicon Valley and you're expected to be the next big thing, you can only kind of disappoint. Whereas for us, I felt like there were, anything we did, people were shocked by.
Yeah, and it's fantastic what you're saying right now. In my case, I'm not coming from a rich family. I remember, sometimes you you normally feel like you're not good enough, right?
Mhm.
And it was interesting that one time, my company was growing, and I had the opportunity, thanks to Endeavor, to talk with Martin Migoya, the founder of Globan, also like a $30 billion company, and. And I said, for you it's easier because when you contact someone, you just say, I am the founder of Globant, and that's it. He told me, I went to an event 2 months ago, and I sent 100 emails. Only one person answered. So
And
it's
today, Bob Iger of Disney returns his emails. He just told me the head of Walmart returned his emails. I know it changes, right? But you got to persevere.
yeah, but even at that point, his company was probably already evaluated at like 10 billion,
Yeah.
and he was not being answered. But
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah,
basically.
look, people always introduce me as the founder of Endeavor, and people think it's that they're confusing me with Ari Emanuel, the Endeavor, the talent agency. So half the invitations I get, I think they have Endeavor, the talent agency. I sneak in and say, guess what? It's the real Endeavor. And they're like, who are you? So you gotta roll with the punches.
So it never ends. And it's good to know from other people that already went there, that, it's going to be there like this every single time,
Every single time.
right?
Every single time. And and you know what though? The day that you get so caught up in thinking it's easy and that you're getting every door opened and you're getting every answer called is the day that you become less agile. Right? There was this great Clay Christensen book called The Innovator's Dilemma that talked
Yeah.
about how companies that get really big and self-satisfied end up often not taking the risk to disrupt themselves and in the process get disrupted. So what I've been talking about with Endeavor entrepreneurs and the outliers who are the fastest growing companies we just met in Portugal, and what Endeavor itself is going through, we have a new Vision 2035. We're having to disrupt ourselves. And I think that there is a benefit of never taking for granted that you're going to get in the room, because you might not get in the room. You might not get that call answered. And you almost have to work harder and fight harder. But in some ways, it keeps you fresh. It keeps you on your toes. It keeps you agile and not, as I said, complacent.
And what makes an Endeavor material entrepreneur?
Well, we've always had our triangle, our selection triangle, and it's been about three things. It's been about the caliber of the entrepreneur, and is this person really solving a pain point at scale, right? Most of our companies are tech or tech enabled, though there are some more traditional companies as well, but they've got to have some innovative idea, but the entrepreneur themselves has to be someone that you want to believe in and you will follow on this journey. The second is the business has to have a total addressable market that's big enough, right, to matter. Is this something that can scale, large enough in one country or ideally in multiple countries? Is it gonna go big? And then lastly, we'll look at the inflection point. And is this something that with Endeavor's help could really grow 10x or more? Because we want to create these role models. And then the last piece of it is, do they have the willingness to be mentored and to learn and to grow and to pay their success forward? For Juan, a big part of what Endeavor does is what we call the multiplier effect, and it is encouraging entrepreneurs to mentor and train and invest in the next generation. So it's not enough to be a great founder just with one company. We're looking for the people, the multipliers, who are going to really build entire ecosystems.
And then, as when you're an entrepreneur, the reality is you can have a fantastic idea, great market and everything, but you're never been there before. You've never been leading a $1 billion company or 100,000 or
Yeah.
$100 million company. So talking with people that already been there before is
Yes.
incredible. I remember in my ISP in Pebble Beach in 2010.
Your international selection panel, yes.
Yes, right, you're right. And I remember when the first panel, I felt so uncomfortable and
Oh,
so under pressure because these people there, normally, this company was more, it was like AI at that point. And in Latin America, it was very easy to make people surprised about what we were being
yeah.
developing. But these people, they already been through this 100 times before. So when they were hearing my pitch, they were like, oh yeah, I know this. So this wrong, 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 whatever. And it was like, oh my gosh. And it was like, even if I don't go through the process, this is great. And I
Mm,
just started
what a
taking
great
notes.
attitude.
I started taking notes because the feedback was, I mean, I made it in my MBA as well and everything. It was like nobody ever told me these things before.
I love that. But there are two things that come to mind hearing that story, which is great. I didn't know that. And when you're talking about the international selection panel, you're talking about the final step in the process to become an Endeavor entrepreneur, right? So we have local offices in 45 countries, 600 people on the ground, and entrepreneurs, founders come through the local process. And then every month, half in person, half virtual. We're actually off to Warsaw, Poland next week to have another selection panel. They're global now. And you get vetted by a final jury of panelists that are venture capitalists and successful entrepreneurs and people who've built companies like Amazon and Netflix and Apple, et cetera. And we look at selection as a service. So the first thing that comes to mind is the idea that, oh my God, everybody's been patting me on the back because they didn't know what to say. And here these people have built these great companies and have so much, they've seen this all before and they can tell me the mistakes before they even happen and have pattern recognition. And I think that is fantastic and part of the mentorship that we want to offer. But the other piece of this is the folks in Silicon Valley may not understand what it is like to build a company in an emerging market, which is different, which is harder. And that is why the peer-to-peer network of Endeavor entrepreneurs is something we've really leaned into, because as great as it is to have these super high profile mentors who've built these great, companies in the US, it's almost even more relevant to find people who've built successful companies in markets like yours. Because, if you talk to someone in Indonesia or in Nigeria or in Dubai or even in Italy, it's probably more relevant to what you went through, in Argentina or in Uruguay or in, Colombia, than it would be to have somebody from, Silicon Valley talk about it. So I think that that's the important part of mentorship is telling people, hey, you can't just be on the receiving end. You have to be on the giving end because there's someone in your community, there's someone coming up who needs to hear from you and your story.
Yeah, I remember that we started with the natural language processing back then at Social Methods.
Wow.
The NLP, it was in 2000 and let's say 8 or something.
Wow.
Yes, and in Argentina it was hard to find people, so you had to hire people from abroad, and
Right.
we started moving the
Right.
wheel. And years later, we saw like a big community of NLP people in Argentina. It was all started there, and it was like, this
The
is very cool.
mafia
The
that you
mafia.
created. I love it.
Yeah, great, like an NLP mafia. But it's super interesting because you see how even if you fail, because the company was not a billion-dollar company, that everybody's trying to or qualifies success as a billion-dollar company or an IPO. I don't think we've been very successful, but that's there. They're still there, and that was built after we started with this company, right?
Well, that's the whole point about the mafias, right? It comes from, we take it from the PayPal mafia, right? And PayPal was not the best exit, but the number of people who've started these multi-billion-dollar companies out of PayPal has been greater than even out of Apple and Google and Meta. So that's the interesting thing when we talk about the Rappi mafia, when we talk about in the Middle East, the Kareem mafia, right? When you talk about these people who've been trained, your mafia that has been trained in in natural language processing, and then years later can be the founders or C-suite of the next generation that leapfrogs. I mean, the fact that that you had dLocal out of Uruguay that goes public. By the way, when it went public, it was like 20% of the GDP was its IPO, right? And when the founders stepped down, the fact that they could pick the former CFO of Mercado Libre as their CEO, right? That's pretty incredible. And now that Marcos Galperin is stepping down as CEO of Mercado Libre, and the fact that he doesn't have to go to the US, but can pick someone on his team to lead, that would have been unheard of. You would have thought, as you said, that all the talent would have to be imported. And that is not true anymore. And that's what I was just telling these folks who weren't listening to me on this AI call, that today, like Max Levchin, who's Ukrainian, sure, built a firm, was part of the PayPal mafia out of Silicon Valley. And this generation of immigrants has built a lot of the AI companies from the US. Guess what? They're going back home and they're training people back home. And so the next generation is going to come from elsewhere. It is going to come from all these places. And I think a lot of people don't see this coming, but it's really, really exciting.
Well, the result is basically like 4 million people hire through these endeavor companies. Is 4 million? 4 million is Uruguay. Is entire Uruguay almost?
Yeah.
Being higher by
endeavor companies. And last year, 88.5 billion in revenue, just the endeavor companies. I mean, that's not nothing.
Not at all. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of, instead of building companies, building ecosystems. People on the other side of the screen, they're probably not familiar with this concept. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah. Well, part of my Chica Loca dream was this idea that if you want to create sustainable economies, you don't invest in microcredit or in government policies, or certainly not USAID, which sadly, today doesn't exist anymore. But instead, you had to find entrepreneurs and support them, but not just to build, as I said, one business. I mean, what's incredible about, let's stick with Argentina, and what's incredible about the founders of Patagon and Mercado Libre and Globant is the number of others that they have systematically invested in, mentored, trained. And what Endeavor has done through our research arm is showcase this multiplier effect. And what we've shown, and we've done this study in now 40 different markets, is it only takes 3 to 4 what we call big bubbles, the multipliers, the people who are investing and mentoring and training that next generation to build an ecosystem. So we're seeing in Poland, we're about to go to Poland, and we have 4 of the 5 big bubbles in our network. We're just about to select Doc Planner, and we have 11 Labs, a top AI firm, and Booksy, and and then the other is now a VC firm. And these 4 companies are really starting this revolution in Poland. We've seen this in Turkey. We've seen this in so many different markets. And I think that the network effects of building ecosystems and of creating these networks of trust is incredible. And the fact that now the ambassador from Argentina to the US, Alec Oxenford, was part of this tech mafia, built Deramate, and eventually was acquired by Mercado Libre. Alec went on to found OLX, another unicorn company, and is now the ambassador. I think that we're seeing this next generation of founders that are shaping public policy, that are shaping business and society. And I think that's the other thing that Endeavor has seen from the get-go is they're not just building companies, they're building countries. And beyond that, our entrepreneurs are now global citizens. So the other thing I will say is, beyond thinking in terms of national borders and national terms, what we're seeing is, 50 of our Endeavor entrepreneurs now live in Dubai. 60 now live in London. A number are moving to Singapore. There are these global, a number are living in Miami or New York, right? And Mexico City. So we're seeing these global cities really attract talent. And I don't think the world has caught on that we're moving from these national borders to these borderless city states where people and talent are flowing.
And this can happen everywhere.
Everywhere. And what Endeavor calls elsewhere, right? The unexpected places.
That's great. So you coach thousands of entrepreneurs. What separates those who survive tough times from those who don't?
That is a great question. And if you look at the Fortune 500 companies in the US, more than half were built during periods of crisis, downturn, recession. And I think that if you think about it in the context of these emerging markets where Endeavor is, crisis and chaos benefit the entrepreneurs because during the status quo, the big companies have all of the government connections, they have all the power, they can attract all the talent. And it's actually during these periods of disruption, look at AI, where you can actually turn things on its head. Just take Globant, that's taking on Accenture and Tata and right, all the top firms. And yet it's Globant who last week launched its AI pods and said, hey, you're going to create a subscription model where you're going to charge by tokens and agents, not by human hours, disrupting the entire IT industry. And it's no wonder that it's Globant and not Accenture, right? That is over 100 billion market cap, and that it is probably a little slow and less agile. And so I actually think that entrepreneurs who take advantage of these moments of chaos are the ones who turn out best. And the other thing I will say is sometimes chaos is externally imposed and sometimes it's internal. And we see a lot of entrepreneurs suffering over the last few years after raising large rounds and having to get to profitability and having to do layoffs and make really hard choices. And this was not fun. It was not easy. But to a T, every entrepreneur I've spoken with that comes out says, this was necessary. And we've come out stronger. And many of the people who lost their jobs, they're now founding the next ones, right? So it's again, you think about the cycle. And I think right now, AI is disrupting everything. And if we don't think with a growth mindset, with a disruptive mindset, we're going to get disrupted. So again, I'll end by saying that, people who take chaos as an opportunity to be an agent of disruption rather than passively be disrupted, those are the winners.
And Endeavor has to go through the same process as well, right?
100%.
Later, we'll ask you a little bit more about the future of Endeavor, but how do you personally think about resilience, especially leading a global organization that basically is a very complex one?
It is. And look, I love that we say we're of by for entrepreneurs. And if you look at Endeavor, we've raised $540 million for our Catalyst funds where we co-invest in our entrepreneurs. We're raising another $300 million fund right now. And 1/3 of our LPs are Endeavor entrepreneurs. So I love that. So it's really of by for entrepreneurs. If you look at our boards around the world, over 50 of our board members are these outlier entrepreneurs who are paying their success forward by being, board members, which is awesome. So I love that even though we have a lot of stakeholders, we have board members, we have mentors, we have, team members, we have entrepreneurs. To me, being very clear that at the end of the day, the entrepreneurs are our main stakeholders and they feel so passionately. I get texts and WhatsApps and emails every day with things that we could be doing differently or better. And I really listen. So I love that. And we're kept on our toes. But I think the other thing I've learned is that we had too much local innovation for a long time. And we were too worried about being globally controlled. And now our entrepreneurs are asking us to grow up. And as an organization, we're actually saying we have to do more that's one endeavor, right? We actually have to centralize oversight. We actually have to stop doing things in 50 different silos and in fact, coordinate and grow up. So it's been super fascinating to have to change how I think about our operations where we were a loose federation and now we need to be more centralized and how to grow up together. So it's always interesting.
I wonder what mental mechanism triggers a no in the mind of Linda Rottenberg.
Yes, and girl. I'm a yes and.
No, but when someone tells you no, it's not possible, what happened in your mind? How do you react?
That just gives me fuel, right? I mean, I get worried when people think my ideas are great. Then I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting boring. I hated 2021. I hated it. When SoftBank came in and Tiger came in and they're like, oh, your markets are obvious. We're here now. I'm like, oh God. Now they've all, for the most part, kind of left. It's back to normal again. I'm back to being Chica Loca. I like it. I don't know. I thrive when people think what I'm doing is like crazy or impossible. When it gets too obvious, that's when I get nervous.
I love that. So when someone says no to that, is exactly where you're going, right?
Yeah, yeah. When people tell me it's a great idea, it's obvious. That's when I question myself.
So let's go a little bit now, we're moving a little bit to the future, okay? Because of course it's easy to talk about what happened today,
Yeah,
but you thought about these things 20 years ago, right?
yeah.
But so what comes to my mind right now is Linda right now is thinking in the next 20 years and probably the next 20 years. So what are the things that you're more excited about the next 20 years?
Yeah, well, I'll just say three things. One, Endeavor, which is this global network of trust, which started in Latin America and now is in 45 markets. We want to be there to support, scale, and invest in high growth entrepreneurs in 100 markets, what we call elsewhere. So not in US, China, or the top five, markets that receive venture capital, 100 markets. But we have to change our operating system. We're not going to have 100 boards and 100 offices. So we have to think about these global city hubs of the future, for example, and how do we organize ourselves differently to reach entrepreneurs in 100 countries in a different way than we have. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I mentioned Endeavor Catalyst, which is our investment fund, and we are a hybrid organization, right? We have this nonprofit arm, we have the for-profit funds, and we want to be one of the first organizations in the world where the nonprofit is fully funded by the returns of the fund, and we've made LPs money too, being a top quartile investment firm. How cool would that be? And in fact, a lot of people are studying our model. But again, people said I was absolutely insane for doing this. And, they didn't understand why we would have a fund and a nonprofit. I'm like, this is obvious. It's a hybrid. Why is everything so binary now? And so I think that that's the second thing. And then the third, which is a really big aim, is taking what I've talked about in this multiplier effect and changing the language of success. So I just spoke at my Harvard reunion this weekend. And one of the things I did was not only tell the story of Argentina and the big bubbles of Mercado Libre and Patagon and Globant, et cetera, and how ecosystems and entrepreneurship are built, but we did the same. We looked at Steven Spielberg and Beyonce and Michael Jordan and some of the celebrity chefs. And when you look at their bubble maps, their multiplier maps, they are actually investing in training, mentoring the next generation. So the great filmmaker, J.J. Abrams, who just produced Star Wars and other things, learned from Steven Spielberg. So I think that this is true. And people came up to me in my class and said, this relates to me. I'm in education, or I'm in law, or I'm in consulting. I need to mentor people. I need to invest in that next generation. So I think we're taking what we've learned in entrepreneurship and applying it more broadly to really change the language of success. Because when people are thinking back at their legacy, it's not about money, right? It's not just about how much they have in their bank account. It really is what they've left in terms of a legacy. And so we want to give people the tools to actually measure that impact they're having.
Normally I say that an entrepreneur is like a gambler, right? But not in terms of the risk. I'm talking about that people don't gamble because they want money. They gamble because they want to gamble, basically. And entrepreneurs, we love the path of what we are doing.
Totally.
And at some point, the reality is I don't see most of the Endeavor entrepreneurs enjoying all their money for themselves and retiring or whatever.
No.
It's all the opposite. We at some point made more money than we need. What's next, right?
Yeah. Well, not only what's next, but it's interesting that some of the phone calls I've gotten, have been at what you think would be the best moments for entrepreneurs, which is after they've exited and cashed out in a significant way. And these tend to be some of the most existentially problematic moments. I've had so many entrepreneurs say they're in a mental health crisis after they've exited because they've lost their identity. And as you say, they had a purpose, right? They were chasing a purpose and a passion and an idea. And now what's left? And it does not matter how much is in their bank account. They actually, if no purpose, if no meaning, if no legacy, like that's when they're drained of any excitement, any authentic connection. So I think people, you're right, they overestimate. And that's why we talk about unicorns and we talk about these multi-billion dollar valuations. And it's important to put things on the map and to give people a sense of how big they are. But otherwise, they're kind of meaningless. And I do think that if we can change how people think about success, and are you a multiplier? How many people have you mentored? How many people have you invested in? How many people have trained in your company, Juan, and are now the NLP gods of the future? Like, that's what people need to be thinking about. And just last night, talk about translating genres. I was at the Tribeca Film Festival, and Lin-Manuel Miranda, the creator of Hamilton, and his father, Luis Miranda, who are Puerto Rican, they were supporting and sponsoring young Latina and Latino filmmakers and producing their companies and giving them access to mentorship and community. And they wanted to learn how Endeavor was operating because it's similar for filmmakers. What a great way to pay their success forward, right?
That's fantastic. I think and I think is at some point is super valuable that we can share this with many people. Sometimes I feel like guilty because I've been given so much by Endeavor, right? And I see and that's the reason why I created this podcast.
I love that.
Because I want other people that are not in contact with Endeavor yet that experience this knowledge that you don't see it anywhere. So when I went to my the international selection panel, I felt like I got scammed by my MBA, right? Because the level of knowledge that these people had was unheard of for me at that point. And how
now think of how much knowledge you have to impart to others, right?
The more I know, the more I know that I don't know. So that's a problem. Yeah, but I'm super grateful of Endeavor for teaching me this. But there's a lot of people out there. How can reach all that people? Because I know that it's not just for Endeavor entrepreneurs are probably the highest level.
Yeah.
But you after that was not satisfied with that and said we need to help more people, and you went for the Scaleups and other programs. Could you tell us a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, look, I think that I think entrepreneurs always juggle with maintaining focus, right? While also wanting their products or services or platforms to reach as many people as possible. And we went through the same thing at Endeavor, that we know that what you're calling the ISPs, the international selection panels, and the sort of premium services and network and community that an Endeavor's built really has to be for the highest growth, highest impact founders, right? The multipliers, the big bubbles, as we call them, the people who are going to have that scale and reach and influence to showcase what's possible. We still wanted to reach other people. And so the pre-selection process, what you're calling the Scaleup program, is could we, through our pipeline, create selection as a service and impart the lessons and some of the learnings at the earlier stage, companies and founders that were at an earlier stage. Similarly, in Argentina, recently they had the Argentina experience, the Experiencia, where 15,000 young people came in a stadium, right? Who fills stadiums in Argentina? Messi, Taylor Swift, and Endeavor entrepreneurs, right? How cool is that? The 15,000 young people showed up to listen to the Endeavor entrepreneurs tell their story. How awesome to go in 2 generations from not having a word to describe entrepreneur to filling an entire stadium of young people who said, hey, if they can do it, I can too. So even if you don't touch everyone directly, the question is, can you have some sort of impact on their lives or their thinking? And maybe some of these people in that audience will grow up to be future Endeavor entrepreneurs.
So many people think about this like Marcus Scalprin or Giver or whatever. So they think like as demigods, right? And maybe they if you think that someone did it because they have a gift, is like a restrictive for other people. So if there is someone like that born in my town, like small town Tolosa, and say, I have the ideas, I want to change the world, everybody can do that. So it's not like you need to be special.
Yeah. Look, one of my favorite recent stories of Endeavor that I mentioned on this CEO call with Jensen of NVIDIA and Michael Dell and Mark Benioff and Steve Case and all these people looked at me like I was crazy again. I'm like, oh yeah. But it's the story of Karim Bagir, who is an engineer born in Tunisia, born not even in Tunis. I don't know if you've seen Star Wars, but there's the fictional planet of Tatooine, the desert planet, which is actually modeled on a real place, a real desert city called Tatooine in Tunisia. This is
I
where this
didn't know
guy
that.
grew up, right? So he grows up in Tatooine in this desert community. He gets educated a little bit in France, but is often like self-taught, gets himself moved to New York, but says, you know what? If I'm really ambitious, I want to move back to Tunisia. And he starts in the early teens using AI. No one's talking about AI at that point, using AI to in the healthcare space. And during COVID, his company Instadeep, that is based in Tunisia with some folks in London, detects all of the SARS COVID variants before anyone else. And BioNTech and Pfizer end up using their Instadeep's AI technology to build that mRNA vaccine, right? And then a year later, or 2 years later in 2023, BioNTech buys Instadeep for $700 million. And today, Kareem and this entire Tunisian, AI development group is doing the AI genomics outside of BioNTech. I mean, inside of BioNTech, one of the top
Wow.
companies in the world, right? So,
Yes.
I mean, if this can happen in Tunisia, right? This can happen in a small town in Argentina or Mexico, or we're seeing folks in Nigeria and in Vietnam and in Saudi Arabia starting companies. It's super exciting and Ukraine. Oh, one of our newest Endeavor entrepreneurs, Anton, who's built Headway, this awesome micro learning app, and comes to the ISP. This was in Dubai, and gets asked the proverbial question, so what's keeping you up at night? Gave an answer I have never in 28 years heard before. Answer to what is keeping Anton up at night: bombs. And these folks are in Kyiv
Yes.
developing some of the top technology that we will see in security platforms, in micro learning, the AI assistant, writing assistants, in drone creation. And so I think that this is what's really exciting, that really innovation can happen anywhere.
That is fantastic. And the Endeavor office in Ukraine is pretty new. So we already have success stories, but how many years do we have there?
No, it's just since last October. So now we're going earlier, but we were able to catch folks that are already doing things, but still need a global platform to go even bigger. And now we'll go earlier stage, but it's super exciting. Super exciting.
So
They were lonely.
yeah, no, it's incredible. And many people says, in places there are complexities it's harder, but then you see Israel, then you see Latin America, then you see, right? It's like, Ukraine, right?
If you're having a bad day, when I'm having a bad day as an entrepreneur, I'm like, oh, well, I don't have bombs going off. So, I have to put this in perspective.
Yes, that's the contextual information.
Mhm.
Normally, I think that what I see normally in Endeavor entrepreneurs is I'm a data person, and I try to correlate everything with everything. There is a name for that when people, it's like I don't know, it's a mental, I think it's kind of a mental problem, something that when you try to correlate everything with everything, right? And I try to correlate why this happened, and what I see is appetite. I see the people in Endeavor. It's not like they are richer or poorer, or they have better technical skills. But the difference is like they have appetite. They want to go, and the more problems, the more the appetite is fed. It's the opposite way that it really works, right?
100%. And I also think that, look, working with the Endeavor entrepreneurs in these 45 markets that we call elsewhere, they're solving real world problems at scale. So even if you take even someone who's been an investor in Catalyst and been so important in the ecosystem and is mentoring, is David Velez, right, who built Nubank, really arguably the top neobank in the world out of Brazil, and he's Colombian, of course, came back from Silicon Valley, but he's banking the unbanked. And so even, right, and even Mercado Libre that we've been talking about is providing a platform for small, medium-sized sellers and people who are just need a place to sell online, and helping the mom and pops of the world. So I think that when you look at what you're doing as solving real world problems at scale and making people's everyday lives better, it also motivates you to keep going. Whereas so many times when I see these, back to your MBA thing, I see these MBAs who are just reverse engineering a billion-dollar company and doing these, right? These, AI for pets in wealthy communities. I mean, it's just like, is that really going to keep you up at night? The dog sitting for the upper class when they're on their yachts. Is that really going to keep you up? Maybe.
Linda, we are getting into the last part. It's the rapid fire. Are you ready for it?
Okay.
You ready?
I'm always ready.
Let's get into it. One book every founder should read.
Okay, well, I have to say crazy as a compliment. I will also talk about one of my husband's books, Bruce Feiler. He's a prolific author, and one of his books, Life is in the Transitions. Because I think that every entrepreneur, you shouldn't just read business genre and startup books. And Life is in the Transitions talks about when, sorry, but shit happens, which it does in your life. And some is voluntary and some is involuntary. And Bruce goes through the ABCs of meaning and how you can overcome disruptors and life quakes. So that's what I would say.
Fantastic.
Even if you haven't had a life quake, you will. And you'll
know.
want this book, Life is in the Transitions. Mark my word.
I haven't read that one, but I will, because you convinced me now. Person, dead or alive, that you love to have dinner with.
Well, okay. Yeah, I'm not going to go with boring answer like Steve Jobs. I'm going to go with, although I wouldn't mind, but I will go with the widow Clicquot, Barb Nicole Ponsardin, who ended up through sheer marketing genius creating the first multinational company founded by a woman. And she's otherwise known, widow in French is veuve. So this is Veuve Clicquot. And not only is she this cool entrepreneur that I talked about, now there's a movie about, but up until now, no one's really heard of or talked about, but she'd have really good champagne too. So it'd be a really fun conversation and we'd have really good things to drink. So that's who I'll go with. Barb Nicole Ponsardin.
I was not expecting any different answer than that one from you. What's the best advice you have ever received?
When things were really hard at the beginning, and two of the people that were early supporters of Endeavor back in Brazil were Jorge Paulo Lemann and Beto Sucupira, who founded 3G, who ended up taking over Heinz and Budweiser from Brazil, right? And all of these American iconic companies. And I didn't understand why it was still so hard. I was 3 or 4 years in and I was like, why is this still so hard? Wow, shouldn't this be easier by now? It's like 4 years, it's like 2001. What's going on? And either, I forgot whether it was Jorge Paulo or Beto, but one of them said to me, look, Linda, you're a pioneer and it's supposed to be hard. Being a pioneer is always hard because if it were easy, someone else would have done your idea before.
Yeah.
And so every time when it's getting hard, instead of being like, oh, what's going on? I'm like, oh, I'm a pioneer. If it were easy, other people would do this, but I'm the pioneer. So that's very helpful reframing.
I love it, actually. Thanks for sharing that with me. What's your superpower, Linda?
My superpower is connecting people. And I love nothing better. And I love connecting people across markets, across industries, across time. I love making these unexpected connections. And I've had a number of people who've ended up with business partners, marriage partners, right? Investment partners. And I just, nothing brings me more joy.
Fantastic. One buzzword that you wish would disappear.
Buzzword?
Buzzword.
I hate the word synergy. It sounds so nice, like a synergy. When it's just like firing people, like, let's be honest, these are business synergies. It's like, okay, it means you have too many people, you're going to fire some of them. Like, can we call a spade a spade? Because doesn't synergy sound like a nice word? Hate it. Retire.
Fantastic. One myth about entrepreneurs you would like to bust.
Okay, well, you mentioned this idea of risk taking, right? I actually believe and know that entrepreneurs are not risk maximizers, they're risk minimizers. They just, as you say, have better data and see around corners and realize what is less risky than other people perceive. But people are not just blindly, just taking risks willy-nilly. And so I think that that concept of entrepreneurs as these kind of swashbuckling, risk at all costs has to go away.
Fantastic. We are almost finishing. So, how can anybody on the other side of the screen support Endeavor or get involved?
Well, go to www.endeavor.org. You can learn about entrepreneurs. And if there's an entrepreneur that you're interested in, let us know. If you are interested and understand what we're building with Endeavor Catalyst, the Global Investment Fund, we have that opportunity. We have opportunities to mentor if you've built a company or scaled a company before. We'd love to connect. Or you can read Crazy as a Compliment if you just want to get ideas to start your own.
I was checking the numbers of Catalyst and are crazy. The result. I mean, comparing with any other fund is crazy.
We're just getting going. Still in day one.
Linda, thank you. This was absolutely incredible. What you've built is inspiring. And these lessons you share with us today will help founders everywhere. In my name, in the name of all entrepreneurs, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, you make me so proud, Juan. And I mentioned Anton of Headway in Ukraine. And he first learned about Endeavor while listening in 2019 to the podcast that Reid Hoffman did with me. I was on the first one of the first 10 episodes of Masters of Scale. And he said, okay, now I need to be an entrepreneur and I need to bring Endeavor to Ukraine. So I am expecting that some founder around the world will hear your podcast and tell me that's what gave him or her inspiration to be an entrepreneur. By the way, we have many great female founders too. We mention that, and entrepreneurs all across the world. So I look forward to meeting those who get inspired by this podcast. And thank you for multiplying your impact.
Thank you very much, Linda. Have a fantastic day.